As I mentioned, I wanted to just keep talking about Christianity to complete that discussion. So we'll move on to early medieval. And one of the things I always show for early medieval is the art related to the tribes before they were Christianized. And so we often refer to this as the art of the barbaric tribes. These are people like the Vikings and the Vandals and such. If you've ever wondered where the word vandalize comes from, well, you can thank the Vandals. So these were really gritty people living in northern Europe at the time. And Christian missionaries were going to come into this region and Christianize them. But this is the type of art they were making before the Christians arrived. One of the things you can notice when you look at it is it's very stylized. It uses a lot of pattern. We refer to these patterns as interlace. You'll notice how they sort of braid together. So one of the terms we use is interlace when we talk about the look of these kind of pieces. And we also talk about animal style because you'll see these sort of abstracted animals on the pieces. A lot of these pieces that you're seeing, you'll notice they come from burials. So this is the famous Sutton Hoo burial purse. And the one before it was like a little clasp, that was used for clothing, but again, found in a burial. So these are items we typically find in burial contexts. And this piece was part of a purse that they thought you could pay for your passage across the river of death. You've heard this river probably referred to as like the river Styx, let's say, in Greco-Roman mythology. This idea of like a transitional river is very big in most death cultures and early pagan societies. The Nile River for Egyptians, you had to cross the Nile, right? The river Styx, etc. So this was a little purse lid, right, for the deceased, where he would have his money and be able to be like, here's my coinage to pass over the river and enter into the land of the dead. So just kind of a cool story. You also can look at manuscripts to talk about early medieval people. When Christians start to arrive here, they set up monasteries and they begin to work with the local population to Christianize them. And one of the ways they could do that, of course, was through education. So they start to make books, right, that they can present to these people so they can learn. Later on, they become luxury goods. So more wealthy Christians want these because they looked at them as luxury goods, right? Things that they could kind of show off to other people. And you'll notice there's still a lot of stylization in these. You see the interlace and the borders. One of the things we notice in the medieval period is that realism, all the things that were sort of learned during the Greco-Roman period, unfortunately seem to be lost during this period. So you start to see bodies that aren't quite right, imagery that's not very realistic. One of my favorite things is in the Lindisfarne Gospel. If you look at it closely, you'll notice that the guy like kind of leaning in the room to talk to St. Matthew, where is his body? So little mistakes like that crop up. And again, it speaks to kind of a lessening of talent during this time. Just a few other pages from the Book of Lindisfarne. So you can just see some imagery related to books. You'll notice they're gorgeous. They were hand done, handmade, exquisite, extremely time intensive, from making the pages, all the way through to the lettering and the coloring of the imagery. Just incredible artistic achievements. And of course, we can finish off talking about the Middle Ages. These are the periods of like the Ottonians, the Romanesque period, the Gothic. So if you're looking at very specific ideas of art historical time. So I'll show you here St. Michael's Church in Hildesheim, Germany. This is related to the Ottonian period of the later early medieval. And one of the things we talk about at St. Michael's Church is the famous doors of Bishop Bernward. And they're very cool. They have Old Testament stories on one side and New Testament stories on the other side. So on the left, you have the Old Testament tales, and on the right, you have the New Testament tales. And what's kind of neat about them is if you look from one panel across directly to the next panel, so left to right, one to one, right? You can look at the story to the left and realize that it actually prefigures a story to the right. And that's a big term for Christians, prefiguration, we call it. So there's a lot of Old Testament stories that Christians believe prefigure New Testament stories. For instance, here you can see Adam and Eve eating the apple. sin, right? Prefiguring Jesus dying on the cross to forgive the sins of man. So it's a neat idea of how to show you the examples of prefiguration and link the Old Testament and the New Testament together. Here's some details. So you see the one detail of Adam and Eve eating the apple, and the other one is God finding out what they did. And it's kind of funny because they're all blaming everybody that can be blamed but themselves, right? So God's like, Adam, hey. And he's like, it wasn't me, it was her. And then she's like, well, no, it was this lizard thing, right? Because it's not the snake yet. It's not been punished. Notice, again, not a lot of realism in these. It's a little bit fantastical, very stylized. Another favorite of mine is Jesus Libertas's Last Judgment of Saint Lazare, from Saint Lazare. Basically, it's a church of Saint Lazarus. So interesting note there. This is a Romanesque piece, if you want to be very specific about the time period of the medieval we're in. And the Romanesque people were very concerned with the Last Judgment and the end of days. They were living right around the millennium, the year 1000. So it makes perfect sense to me. So you see a lot of images related to Last Judgments at this time, rising from the grave, St. Lazarus, right? So in the middle, you see Christ, and he is judging the righteous and the wicked. The righteous, of course, on the right, the wicked on the left. And again, you'll notice this is a very stylized image. I love this image. It really speaks to the kind of terror and panic we think people felt during the millennium. And this was actually on the outside of the church. So we think during this time, it became more popular to decorate exteriors of churches to advertise to Christians, like, look out, you might be judged soon. You better come on into the church, right? So that attitude changes. Here's a nice detail of the weighing of the souls. And I always joke that this piece proves to you the devil does not play fair. Because the devil, you'll notice, has his minions kind of pulling on the basket as they're trying to weigh the soul for is it righteous or wicked. So the devil's cheating. And you'll notice that the angel's trying to help the soul a little bit, like push the basket up. So it's a nice insight into like what evil really is, and evil doesn't play fair, right? Chartres Cathedral, this is a Gothic church. So you're getting towards the end of the medieval here during the Gothic period, mainly known for its architecture, building these gigantic churches that were like the pinnacle of their community, using brilliant architectural techniques. Here's a nice slide that shows you the use of the flying buttress, for instance, to support the weight of the church, and the kind of vaulting you might see here. So you go inside Chartres, you'll notice the vaulting has made these huge, massive open spaces. The use of stained glass begins in the Gothic, letting all this light into the cathedral and creating these very magnificent spaces. Gothic cathedrals were known for rose windows. So again, thinking about the use of stained glass. And Gothic people actually thought light was mystical, that light like represented God. So it's not surprising to me that you see all these stained glass windows like all over, right, Gothic churches. And another one from Chartres, very famous, of course, is the Notre Dame de la Belle Verrière, or translates from the French to Our Lady of the Beautiful Window. And you see the Virgin Mary here. She's shown with Christ on her lap. The very popular Theotokos imagery of her. And she's also crowned here, so she's also Queen of Heaven as well. So you see this beautiful stained glass that is very common, again, with most Gothic cathedrals.